No, sit where you
Smarter than I am. It knows it's beautiful.
Wasn't that really, really nice? Another story about Josh. Well, that's right. When you said that one, I opened. I said, "He's at home." I can see you really do it because it's like I know, but and now he's done.
Sherry.
Oh, called out.
Well, I can't believe I'm putting these out. Just yesterday when I saw them, I put them on. I said, "Oh, poor guys." Now I need them, so I apologize. Anyway, welcome. I'm Alan Roseberg, co-chair of the Howard J. Siegal Institute, along with Lisa Fisher, who is hello, Lisa. We're so happy you could join us today. As many of you know, Howard Siegal was a dear friend of mine, and he was one of our Jewish communal heroes of philanthropy. He was a top Federation fundraiser, a storyteller, and mentor. And established in his memory and jointly presented by the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford and the Jewish Leadership Academy, led by Heather Friedland. Thank you, Heather. The Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute is open to the entire community, and it's designed for both new and seasoned leaders. So we're thrilled we have a nice mix here tonight. As I mentioned earlier, Howard was a dear, dear friend of mine. And tonight's presentation with Dirk would be right up his alley. He could talk to anyone. He knew the value of talking to people on a one-to-one basis. He would have been a wonderful attorney, being able to listen to people and grab from them what was important to them and the information they had.
But he made a good sense not to be a lawyer.
Yes, his parents might have wanted to be a lawyer, but he did all right. And before we introduce tonight's speaker, I'd like to introduce my other dear friend, Lois Siegal. And Lois, if you would come to say a few words for us.
Hi, I'm so glad to see all of you tonight. Thank you for coming. Howard was one of the nicest men I've ever met in my life. He loved Mickey Mantle, baseball, New York Yankees baseball, and he loved his life. He loved his life, and he loved the Federation. And because of that, he loved the ask. He loved and just had a beautiful way of asking people if they would kindly empty their pockets. So, I'm very excited tonight. We have a great speaker, Dirk, who I met on the phone, and we had a really great conversation with him. So without further ado, Dirk, please come on up.
Wonderful. Yeah, I will speak to Lois's statement about Howard. Howard was an ABB, anything but Boston. So you're right. Howard was a true Yankees fan. Anyway, Dirk, our topic tonight is inspire with an exclamation point. Lend your voice to the community. And Dirk will lead us through a workshop where we will look to build a case for support that will drive meaningful donor conversations and hopefully relationships. He's a member of JFNA's community consulting team and works with communities across the continent, helping them to identify best practice development strategies, coaching, and training. Dirk has spent nearly 20 years working as a developmental professional and has vast experience with many forms of philanthropy. He's from Denver. I'm sure some good skiing out there. And he has extensive experience in development planning, lay leadership engagement, major gift development. And he resides in Denver with his wife, Karen, and his three lovely children. So please welcome Dirk for our
Pleasure to be here. I just want to take a moment to thank Lisa and
Alan and Lois and Heather and Jody Deb for their hospitality and welcoming me to Hartford. This is my first trip to Hartford. This will not be my last trip to Hartford, so this is the first of many. There's plenty of room up front. So if you want to move up front, go right ahead. If not, no problem. So before we get started, and just to let you know, this thing up here, that's not going to guide where we go. This is just for background noise. What's going to guide where we go is in the middle of this room. I am a big believer in collective expertise. By the show of hands, how many of you have either been working or volunteering in the Jewish community for more than 20 years? More than 10 years? More than 5 years? We covered just about everyone. There are probably 20 people in the room. Average time spent, let's say 15 years, but 300 years of collective expertise in this room. We are going to learn together. We come in this room knowing things that we forget that we know. And so I'm going to ask you to bring that with us tonight so that we can share with our peers and we can learn together. Quickly, before we get into our topic, I would just love, very quickly, because I want to be mindful of time, if we go around the room, tell me your name, the organization that you're here on behalf of, and your role in that organization, and one thing that you're curious about. I want to try to incorporate that into tonight's program as much as possible. So if we could start over here, that would be great. Fine. We'll come back. Put you on the spot. Great. Thank you.
I'm Gary Starr. I'm Vice Chair of the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford. I chair the Long Range Planning Committee and wanting to feel more comfortable making the ask.
Okay, so you're curious about how to do that. Great.
I'm Leanne Benediva, and I'm here for various organizations that I volunteer for.
Please.
Sherry Pliskin, I'm here from Solomon Schechter Day School. And
You have fans. That's great.
I can't think of
That's okay. No problem. Please.
I'm Holly Hest, and like Leanne, I'm here on numerous organizations as a volunteer. And I'd like to learn how to basically feel comfortable asking what I want.
Great. Excellent. Just as a good place to be.
I'm Peter Fishman, I'm president of the JCC. I'm also president of Voices of Hope, and I just like to keep on building my knowledge so I can do a better job.
Great. Thank you. That's good.
I'm Jessica Kohler. I'm the administrator at Sinai in Newington. And I'm looking to perhaps get my MBA in development, so I'm starting here.
Great. You're not going to get credit for this, but I'm glad.
I want to see if I look at it.
That's good. This is good. Please.
Hi, I'm Lisa Brady. I volunteer in many capacities, and I'm curious also about making other people feel comfortable about doing this.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Lenarski. I'm director of community relations at Jewish Association of New Living, and I get some to learn from everybody here. But I guess working in Jewish community.
Sure. Welcome. Thank you.
My name is Gary. I'm the director of the Jewish Association of Community Living, homesteading in the area. And I guess I'm a little curious how we get our word out to folks, the type of organization we are, working with people so they get a lot.
Yes. We're inundated with messages and asks how do you
I'm Alan Rosenberg, and I'm the co-chair, again, with Lisa Fishman of the Howard J. Institute, Howard J. Siegal Institute, also a member of the Major Gifts Committee of the Federation. So this will be
wonderful.
Marty Melnick, I work with the Federation of Jewish Nightclubs, and I work with wide variety of seminars throughout the state.
Israel, so totally new.
So day 4 on the job?
That's right.
Nice, I like that.
And I'm also on the board at JT now. I'm Lisa Fishman. I'm the co-chair with Alan for the Howard J. Siegal Leadership Institute. I'm also the vice chair with Alan Parker for the Leadership Academy. And I'm a volunteer in many different capacities for the organization. But as I said to you on the telephone, I think that it's really, really important as a community in order to continue the work that we do and for our organizations to thrive. We need to learn how to communicate with others, our donors, how to have a conversation, how to not be afraid of it, and help people understanding that you're not asking for yourself, but you're asking for
You introduce yourself. Is there anything you're curious about?
I'm curious about how tonight's going to go.
You and me both. That's great.
I'm Judy Singer. I'm the Community Relations Council of the Federation. And I'm just curious to see what I'm going to learn this evening.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. As I mentioned, this is background noise, but I will go through our overview. This is where we're going tonight. This is our roadmap. Reconnecting with the why, understanding ourselves in this work, building the case for giving, setting up for success, donor engagement in the ask, and at the end, Q&A. And after the formal program is over, I will stick around for those of you who have additional questions. When I do trainings like this, and I do trainings for federations, for other Jewish organizations, for secular organizations, and when the topic of conversation is external, making the ask, building the case, I like to take us back first. Take us back to why we do this work. I think it's illustrative of where we're trying to go if we can understand where we've been. We all bring our past experiences and influences to this, but often we don't take the time to connect with why we did this work in the first place and why we still do it today, which evolves over the course of time. So for our first section, in groups of 2 or 3, I think we have relatively even number groups. I would like you to find a partner or 2 partners, and I want you to answer the following questions and share with each other. Why do you do this work? What were your transformative experiences that shaped who you are? And who influenced you? Why do you do this work? What were your transformative experiences? And who inspired you? Find a partner, or a couple of partners. We're going to spend 5 to 7 minutes answering those questions, sharing with each other, and then we're going to come back and have a discussion about why is this important. Ready? Okay, go. Context of community, and specifically to being advocates for our organization, asking people to join us in supporting the great work that all of our organizations do. Why is it important to reconnect with our own why? Yes, please.
If we don't feel passionately about what we're doing, how can we ask somebody to come along with us?
Great answer. Passion. The demonstration of passion. Lisa.
I feel sometimes that I constantly have to revisit myself. Because
Expand on
things change and you vacillate and you grow or you regress. And I'm thinking that every time I am having a conversation with somebody about their Jewish philanthropy, I have to do a check-in with myself and make sure that I can inspire myself first.
I think that's a great example of how an exercise like this can be used in the context of our organizations, whether it's a board retreat or a committee retreat or a professional team retreat, where we take a step back from our day-to-day responsibilities, because all of us get incredibly busy and wrapped up in the minutia of community and all of the wonderful things that are associated with that. If we step up and step out of that and remind ourselves of why we do this in the first place, it does a couple things. One, it allows us to see ourselves in present day, because your reasons for doing something 20 years ago may have shifted. Two, it helps us to reconnect with passions. And in the context of engaging others in doing our work, if we're not passionate about it, how can we expect the people who we're engaging with to care one bit about what we're doing? Please.
I think it also humanizes us. So rather than just being somebody who's asking them for something, if you're able to relay the why, then they see you as a human that they can relate to, and then they go on that journey with you and care more. Because if you were doing a big ask, there's that relationship aspect of it. So you become less of a paper pusher and more of an actual person.
That's an outstanding point. We're not just the organizations that we represent. We are all unique humans on the planet. And our own personal story and narrative doesn't have to be that other person's story and narrative. They don't have to care about the same things that we care about. But if we can then, by using our own narrative, show ourselves as humans, that creates a different dynamic. I'll share a story. So I am honored to work with an organization called One Table. I don't know, anybody heard of One Table? Relatively new organization, Jewish organization that engages millennial Jews around Shabbat dinner. I happen to be coaching one of their developer professionals, and she was sharing a story with me from earlier this week where she was meeting with a donor, and it was pretty standoffish at first, not rude, but there was a feeling out process. And Olga, who is from the former Soviet Union, moved to the United States in 1990, had an opportunity to share her own personal journey, her own personal narrative and story. And immediately upon finishing her story, the dynamic with that donor changed instantly. Unbeknownst to her, the person she was meeting with had spent most of her volunteer career working for organizations who made Olga's journey possible. So by showing herself as a human, a unique human on the planet, and not just a representative and a partisan of their organization, it created a level of vulnerability and openness in the person sitting across the table. I'm curious, when you were listening to your chavruta partners, the people at your table, what did you notice about the person sharing their story? Just quickly, what did you notice about them? Body language, articulation? Yes, please, Martin.
They showed the passion why they do what they do.
Say more about that. How did that look?
It looked genuine, and it was relational. Relational practice. We're going to come back to that, because that's a critical aspect of what we're trying to do, is create relationships that are sustainable, that are deep, and that are authentic. And there are ways to do that and ways not to do that. But that relational practice is critically important. When you think about your roles as advocates in the organizations that you represent, how does remembering your own personal narrative prepare you for success
in meeting with individuals in the community? Please, please.
I know it gives me confidence.
Okay, it gives you confidence. You reconnect with that belief and that faith in the power of community. How else? When you're meeting with someone, and we're going to get to this a little bit later, but when you're meeting with someone, possibly for the first time, what tools do we have at our disposal to develop those relationships? Please.
Talking and getting to know them better and finding out what things you have similar to talk about.
Curiosity,
Yeah.
inquiry.
Person. My kids always say,
yes.
when I get on the airplane, there goes mom with your new best friend.
Yes.
Because they know when I get off the plane, I'm going to have that person's business card and I'm going to know everything about them.
So that's an excellent. So we remember the questions that we ask ourselves and thinking about our own personal journeys, our influences, our transformative experiences. We can use those same questions to have a better understanding about the person sitting across the table. To look for that intersection, not necessarily about passions, but about experience, values, some link that connects us. And by using those questions and demonstrating genuine curiosity about the people sitting across the table from us, we'll find those inflection points. Anything else that stood out from this exercise? Did anybody surprise themselves by maybe how their narrative changed over the course of time? Judy, I see you're maybe?
I think that, Lois and I have known each other for years,
Okay.
but there are things about Lois that I learned in our conversation.
Yeah. And that's not unusual, especially because we don't necessarily take the time to do this. And we see people in community that we've known for decades. But how often do we put ourselves in a position to have a conversation that's intimate? That's about who we are as people, not what we do as people. Those experiences and influences are the building blocks of our own values and how we see the world. So I would strongly encourage you to use this big why with your boards, your committees, any gathering of people who are trying to have a shared experience or mobilize around a shared cause. If we can use this to not only connect with the external, but to build community internally, we're going to be that much stronger for it. Okay, great. Moving on. This is my favorite section. By show of hands, how many of you roll out of bed every morning looking forward to fundraising? Favorite thing on the planet to do? Show of hands. Any hands?
Come on, Sherry.
No hands? Set a half a hand. Okay.
If you do it professionally, you better.
How many of you in your organizations, either because you're paid to do so, or because you're volunteer, fundraise for your organization? By show of hands. How many of you are active in fundraising for your organizations? Okay. So we have, how many of you love to do this, and how many of you have to do this? Part of what we bring to this work are our own assumptions and biases towards fundraising, fund development. I was doing a class for the BBYO International Staff Retreat in January. And we do a longer session on this topic of assumption and bias, because we bring all of that with us, not just about fundraising, but about a variety of things to our work every day. And so how do we understand and unpack what our biases are, what assumptions we make, what fears we have? And we were having a conversation around that, and there was a little bit of tension in the room. It wasn't bad, it was more just struggle of, well, what are our biases? And then I asked the question around fundraising. How many of you love to fundraise? No hands. How many of you have to fundraise? Everybody in the room. What assumptions do you make about fundraising? And then everybody's hand shut up. Because I think we make assumptions about fundraising, and many of us have informed opinions about fundraising that we bring with us that may prevent us from doing the work in the best way possible. So, as a group, when we think about fundraising, what assumptions come to mind when you hear the term fundraising?
That the people you ask to be
The people you ask, the other person, they're not going to like it. It's going to be an uncomfortable experience for them. What else?
Immediate rejection.
Immediate rejection. So there's risk there, fear, rejection.
If they don't want to give, but you're convincing them to.
Yeah, so you're cajoling them. Their basic operation is there. I'm not going to give, so it's your job to convince me otherwise. Yes,
Every
please.
time they see you, they think you're gonna ask them for money.
Ah, yeah.
They're afraid to come up and talk to you.
They're across the street. They see you coming from a mile away. Lisa, did you have your hand up?
Yes, because I think that we make assumptions about fundraising in the sense that at that moment, we have to ask for money. And we forget that we have to build relationships. And not every meeting that we have with a prospective donor or a current donor has to be about asking them for money at that moment. And so I think that many people jump to that. They go straight to the, okay, set up the appointment, make the phone call, whatever confidence they have, however they do it. Okay, and today I'm going to ask them for X amount of dollars. But in the meantime, why does it have to be about that? Why can't it be about picking up the phone and saying, I want to get to know you. I want to share with you why I'm involved in this organization. Why can't we make it a conversation? Why can't we get to know people before we jump the gun and ask them for money? So,
Absolutely.
You know, I think that that's part of an assumption that we make, that first phone call has to be.
That assumption is well founded, however, because I think oftentimes organizationally we put that pressure on ourselves. Is that we have to raise money in certain increments of time, and so you have to go out and do it. So the relational piece.
I mean, I'm just.
Well, no, absolutely, which is something that Martin talked about, which you're echoing, is how are we looking at our engagements as not an end, but part of a continuum, where the ask is not the end. It's part of the continuum. Yes, please.
Or another way of looking at it, you really have to raise friends before you can raise funds, right? I mean, it's the relationship, you know, all that. People have to know, believe in what you're doing, and feel that they can connect with that before they're going to write a check. And, you know.
We're trying to build what? What are we trying to build? Relationship. Whatever, deeper. Connections close. Rapport is good. Friendship's good. What else? Partnership based on trust.
Yeah.
Trust. I don't have any scratches to stickers, but I'll give you a dollar. Trust. Trust. Do we build trust when we ask people for money without building a relationship? No. No, we don't. We have to build trust. And so much of our assumptions around fundraising stems from the pressure that we feel to make the ask. Because it goes against what we know to be true, which is if we're going to develop relationships that are sustainable, that are authentic, and authenticity is a big piece of this, that are based on trust and shared values, the ask shouldn't have the majority of our focus. It's the relationship piece. And that the ask should be a natural result of that process. Other thoughts about our beliefs towards fundraising or our assumptions that other people are making? Yes, please.
That it's wrong. That asking for money is wrong.
How many of you have heard that before? Asking for money is wrong. Okay. Yes. Don't ask me for money, don't talk about money. Now, where do a lot of those messages come from?
People who don't want to give.
Came from people who don't want to give, but oftentimes it comes from our own experiences. It comes from our youth. It comes from the messages that we received about money and whether money was discussed or how it was discussed or how it was viewed. Why do we want to know what assumptions we make about fundraising? Why is that important? Yes, please.
Because we can project that onto someone else.
Yes. Say more about that. How would that look in the context of a donor engagement?
Well, let's say I have a belief that, well, let's just say I have issues around giving. And I'm engaging in a conversation with a donor or a potential donor. I think some of it's on a very unconscious level that you're putting on to the person across from you in how you present, how you speak, how you connect. Maybe not even actually asking, making me ask because of your own fear. So.
Yes, we fear rejection. I heard somebody say rejection. We fear a relationship risk, especially in small communities. Small Jewish communities and all Jewish communities are small. All Jewish communities are small. We have layers upon layers upon layers of shared history and connection. And when you are in a position of asking someone to support the good work that you're doing, and I've known you for years and we're friends, I may be putting our relationship at risk. Probably not, but that's the assumption that we make, is that if I ask you for money, that's going to change the nature of our relationship. All of these things are really important to identify, not for the purposes of eliminating them, because these are hardwired behaviors and thoughts that we have. It's knowing that they exist and then building strategies around how to put them to the side. If you're worried about relationship risk, or if you're worried about how that person's going to respond, how are you going to be in that environment? How are you going to be as an advocate for your organization? Are you going to be effective? No. You're probably thinking about what you're scared about, rather than why we do this work and why it's so important, and what you're passionate about. So I would strongly encourage you to really think through how do you feel about fundraising? And it is okay, absolutely okay. I work with groups all the time, where if you're not comfortable putting yourself in that position of sitting across the table and asking someone for money, it's just not something you're up to. Does that mean you cannot be a productive player in fundraising for your organization? Absolutely not. There's so many ways for us to be strong advocates for the work, opening doors to new conversations, joining our professional partners for those conversations, thanking donors for the support that they provide to our organization. There are many, many, many ways for us to be part of that relationship continuum. Soliciting people is one of them. Okay, moving on. So all of our organizations are in the same business, trying to make a positive impact on Jewish life in some way, shape, or form. We share that responsibility collectively. However, we're all representing individual organizations that hopefully have unique aspects. So in groups of 4 to 6, so I want you to pair up with people that are either adjacent to you or behind you. And I'd like you to address the following. When you think about the organizations that you represent, what are the core values of the organization? What are the big questions my organization is trying to address? What is the impact that my organization is making in the community? And what makes my organization unique? So I'll repeat those. What are the core values? What are the big questions we're trying to address? What is the impact that the organization making in community? And what is unique about my organization? So find a group, another pair to work with. We'll be in groups of 4 to 6. I want you to take 5-ish minutes or so and answer those questions in your group representing your organizations, and then we'll work you're part of. I'm curious, how many of you, and go ahead and say, you can stay in your group. How many of you, how many of your organizations have values that aren't just assumptions that you're making about the values of the organization, but that are clearly articulated? The organization has gone through a process to state, these are the values that guide our work. Show of hands. Not a mission statement.
Not a mission.
Not a mission statement. Values. What are the values in which we believe that are published? Are they published? So we have. So mission statement is it's more about the what we do. The values ground the mission statement. It's the every aspect of our work. Core organizational values should permeate everything you do as an organization. It's the basis for decision making. It's the basis for messaging. It's the basis for your organizational narrative. So we have a couple of organizations. How many of your organizations have talked about, most organizations have a mission statement. How many of your organizations have created a vision statement or a statement about the future? Where are you going? By show of hands. So we have a couple.
It's on the website there.
Remind us your organization and what you do.
Simultaneously, in both of my organizations, both the JCC and Voices of Hope, we are in the process of strategic planning.
Okay.
So, if you read the mission statement for the JCC, it's a page long because we do so much stuff. For Voices of Hope, it's much shorter. And we are in the process of, there's been these strategic plans from the JCC done every 5 to 7 years for a long time. So we're taking a look for the next 5 years. And for Voices of Hope, it's a brand new organization. So this is our first time doing these kinds of exercises. We just finished our vision statement. And we had a mission statement already done. So it's a process, and it's involving the board and some other people in both organizations. In the JCC, it's a bigger group doing the strategic planning, so we're bringing more outside people in. But it's a very good process to find who you are, what you do, and how you're going to get there.
Yeah, no, I just one comment, and then I want to come back down. I think one thing on that is our organizations, just like when we talked at the very beginning, who we are as humans on the planet and what influences us and why we do this, evolves over the course of time. Organizations, same thing. The conditions under which we operated 20 years ago are very different today. And if we cannot articulate clearly the values that drive our organizations and where we're going, it's going to be very difficult to get others to support our work. Alan, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask Peter, would you tell everyone, remind everyone what Voices of Hope is? I don't know if you even know it.
No, please.
I didn't know if Voices of Hope, and I know what it is,
Right.
right?
So Voices of Hope is an organization of primarily second-generation Holocaust survivor children, but other people are involved as well as some survivors and some third generation. And the primary mission is to educate, commemorate Holocaust, and doing that primarily through educational opportunities in schools throughout Connecticut.
Okay. Thank you for pulling that up. Other organizations have done vision statements talking about where they're going. Yes, please.
Do you want me to read it?
Okay, you paraphrase or read. If you have it up and it's short, you can read it, please.
Okay.
And remind us what organization.
Solomon Schechter Day School here in Hartford graduates students who are bold, creative, resilient, and flexible. Students who know how to ask questions and learn, who are guided by a solid moral compass and a sense of urgency to improve the world. Schechter graduates will be positioned to contribute in a meaningful way to both outstanding role models for goodness.
Okay, so you've woven values, you've woven impact and outcome. It's a clear articulation around what the profile of a student, of a graduate, should look like. How many of your organizations talked about uniqueness? What makes you unique as an organization? At a board level, at a community level? Please, Dennis.
Well, I was saying, so our group, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that do what we do of all sizes, from $100 million a year down to $1 million a year. We're the only Jewish organization in Connecticut that provides destination services to people who don't have others.
Great. So you have a clear articulation around what not makes you better. This isn't about better or worse. It's about unique. Why do we exist? We exist to do this, and we're the only ones to do it in this particular way. Other unique. Yes, please. Dirk.
Yeah, Great Harbor Jewish Federation. So, because we are an umbrella institution that looks at the community as a whole and tries to identify where needs are and raise money to support some of those needs, but also identify where those needs are not being met and what the challenges are for meeting those needs and how we can address those problems. And then we building a way to assess the effectiveness of programming as well as building leaders. So that programs like this or programs like the CLI stands for Community Leadership, where we train people and work with people to become better leaders. So we can do it for the whole community, not just for ourselves.
So the breadth and the depth of the organization you represent, what makes it unique? What makes it unique? All right, so we're going to come back together in our small groups. So given what we've just heard around values and vision and uniqueness and impact, I want you to spend 2 or 3, maybe 4 minutes and identify the core elements of a strong case for giving. What are the core elements of a strong case for giving? I want you to do this in your groups. It's a story, part of who we are, part of our collective identity. So a compelling story, a narrative that represents who we are. What else? What else is part of this case for giving? What else has to be there? Yes, please.
Demonstrate a need.
Demonstrate a need. You are there to answer a big question, which is a need in the community. What else? Please.
Sort of correlate
You can share more than once, yes.
To correlate to that, and that is, it's a need that resonates with the potential donor. So
expand on that.
Well,
yeah, please.
so if you're going to be asking somebody for money, you need to make them feel good, and you have to touch on something that they care about. And so it's not merely a demonstrated need in the community, but it's something that resonates with them and it helps fulfill their personal sense of values.
Yes, so there is an example of an individualized case for giving. And we're going to talk about that in the next session of what do we actually do when we're in the room, engaging people face to face, asking them to support the work that we do. So you want to find the intersection of a donor's passions and the work that you're doing in the community. That's what you're finding. Other elements of a case for giving. What else? What needs to be there? You're dreaming. What do you want people to see? What do you want people to feel, know? Yes, please.
I mean, it's what you've been talking about, the why, the passion.
Why do we exist? Why do we exist? What else? We talked about this earlier.
What you can do with the money. What you can do with the money that they will, the impact that they
What's
have.
the impact of the organization? How is the presence of the organization in its work making a difference in our community? What's the ripple effect of our existence organization? What else? What makes us unique? And that can take a couple of different forms. So I work with an organization there. It's a secular organization called Truckers Against Trafficking. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It is an anti-human trafficking organization that started by training truck drivers on how to identify and what to do if they see something that may resemble human trafficking. They have involved organizations like to do legislative affairs, law enforcement training, oil and gas, busing. They are taking a unique, systemic approach to combating human trafficking. So the way that they do their work can be a differentiating factor. So your organizations have a unique way of doing your work, a delivery system, a modality that separates you. That's part of that case as well. That's part of that case. It's not just you're the only, but the how you do your work. That's critically important. That demonstrates the intentionality that you have as an organization to create a change. Anything else? Anything else we're missing here? I would say values. Organizations, we in the Jewish community, our work is based in values. Jewish values that are handed to us at Sinai and have transferred over 3,500, 4,000 years. How often do we talk about our organizational work in the context of values? Do we? Is this part of the community narrative? Is it? That's good. That's good that you have defined values that represent your organization. Does that guide decision making? Do you use that at the board level, at a committee level, at a professional level? Do you put those values up on the wall and say, how are we doing? How do these look in practice? Not always.
Not always.
Not always.
I mean, because
Please.
I think that when people engage with other people and their organization, most of the time they're talking about what they're doing.
Yes.
And that's the conversation.
And-
This is
and-
what we're doing.
And that's reality because we have limited bandwidth. We have limited attention spans and time to communicate what we need to communicate. And getting into values can be more complex and can take longer. But having organizational values that are unique to your organization, not just we believe in Jewish values, but what are the values that you hold true that you use for every decision made by the organization? Do those exist, please?
One of the challenges is that for people that are Jewish involved, I think everybody in this room, I would say that we share the values. We share values because we're all trying to create a better Jewish world. And there's lots of ways to do it. There's ways to take care of your, just people who have disabilities or needs. That way you take care of people who are injured. You take care of people that are, you take care of the outside world, the inside world. So sometimes you ask a donor and it's not even, they'll share your values, they'll share your passion, they'll share, but they can't give to everything because we're all wanting to do the same thing to a certain extent because Jewish people will give to Jewish people. It's not like you're doing the ballet or the hospital where you have a huge pool of people, all different places that will support this organization, including Jewish people.
Okay.
So one of our unique challenges is that you've got donor fatigue because you've got whoever has means is asked many, many, many times in the Jewish community to support what is important to them, what is important to the person. And so, I feel like we have to be very careful about our donors because we really abuse people in our Jewish community.
We're small.
We're small.
Okay.
And I work for a gentleman that tells me he gets 12 solicitations a day because he's a person of significant needs. And he's learned to say no. But every time he says no, it's hard.
And I've never, you're unique. I've never heard donor fatigue in any other. No, it's real. It's real. It's the environment in which you work on a daily basis is you're talking to many of the same people. How we're talking to them and how we're communicating with them. Because it's been my experience that for people who are philanthropic, some people aren't philanthropically inclined. They're just not. So let's stick to the people who are philanthropic. Oftentimes what differentiates the things to which they will pay attention and the things that they won't is not what the organization is saying, it's how that organization is approaching that individual. What's the level of intentionality and thought put into that approach? How are they engaging me in a conversation around community compliance? Is it 15 emails, direct mails, phone calls that make gifts that are transactional? Or is there more thought involved? You have a hand up back here. Holly, you had your hand up, yes.
So I totally agree about the how. I love Sherry. And one of the reasons I think she's been so successful at Schechter is because she's like a master at, she's so likable, and people building relationships with people is like her strong suit. So I think that that's been the key to her success. And also, you know, Leanne and I are involved with Friends of the IDI. And when I met with the woman who heads up the Connecticut Westchester region, what she said to me was, our biggest competitors are not other Jewish organizations. They're non-Jewish organizations that Jews are choosing to give to, because Jews give to Jews and other organizations, yes, but non-Jewish people don't give to Jewish organizations, usually. I mean, I'm making a generalization, but so that's what she said. So if you can change that mindset, then maybe you can change the behavior. That is a great statement. Do we have another point on that? Or did you have something to say?
Change what mindset? That Jews shouldn't give to other organizations?
No. Holly, will you expand on that? Change what mindset?
It can change their understanding of the needs of the Jewish community and their responsibility towards the Jewish community.
Yeah, I think
maybe their willingness to increase how they give to the Jewish community, knowing that people who are not Jewish don't feel a responsibility towards the Jewish community like Jewish people do.
Part of it's messaging, part of it's the practice that we bring to it. Are we taking a relational practice to our approach to donors? So let's go to the next section, because that's a great segue. Well, yeah, we're done with us for now.
Right, for the moment?
For the moment. I'm going to ask a really difficult question. Raise your hand if you think our work is important. Just raise your hand if you think our work is important. Okay, great. Hands down. I want you to think for a second to the most important conversations that you had in your life. Just take 30 seconds and think about the most important conversations you had in your life. Okay. By a show of hands, how many of those conversations were on the telephone? None of them. Not a surprise. When I ask that question, this is typically the response. When something is important, we tend to have those conversations in person. If it's important, we get together and we talk about it face to face. Looking someone in the eye, dreaming together, sharing our passions and our experiences, telling our stories. Something's important, we do this. So there was a conversation earlier, I think I just mentioned it, around our competition. Our competition isn't just the organizations that are represented in this room. Our competition is the arts organizations, the hospitals, the universities. These organizations that have been highly successful in raising resources have put relationships at the center of the engagement. And when they're meeting with their most significant donors, they're doing it face to face. They're doing it in person. When you ask someone to meet with you in person, what does that communicate?
They're important.
Say that again?
They're important.
They are important. That they are important. If I'm going to take the time to want to sit down with them in person, that they have value to me and to my organization. So if that communicates that they're important, when we do the opposite of that, what does that communicate? They're not important. They're not important. How often, though, in our engagements with donors, does it look something like this? Will you, hey, I'm calling to see if you'll give to the organization again this year, but you'll give the same as last year? Thank you so much. How often does that take place? How often is that normal? More often than not. More often than not. And some of that goes back to what we talked about earlier, which is our own fears, our own discomfort with sitting across the table from someone and having a conversation about community and philanthropy. That's where the relational piece is so critically important. If we're developing relationships, those conversations are so much easier. Lisa.
I recently experienced getting an email about from an organization that I had given to in the past, and the email was, thank you so much, you did this last year, blah, 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 would you blah, 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 and then on the bottom of the email, and then it said, please see the attachments below. There were 12 attachments to this email about where my, what I could give to. Never had a conversation with me, never, and I was not furious at the organization, I was furious at the person, because she threw so much at me in this email with all these attachments, okay, that I'm supposed to go through and understand what all this stuff is. And I think that we sometimes I think different organizations prioritize whether or not it's important enough to meet that person in person, or the gift is large enough or small enough to meet that person in person, and we kind of make these marks of, well, if they give X amount of dollars, that constitutes me meeting them in person. If they don't get that much money, well, it's a postcard.
Yes, and organizations, they do make those decisions just based on capacity. However, I will submit that even when you have identified your most significant supporters, people who've been giving for decades, have X number of dollars, and I'm going back to more of a federation example. Other organizations likely do this as well, but I've seen this in the federation, is, yes, I'll take these cards. And what happens is that well-intended people get really busy. They get really busy, or they don't really want to do it in the first place, but they feel kind of obligated to do it. And so it's typically the phone call example. And think about it from your own perspective. You all support organizations. Probably supported the same organizations for many, 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 many years. What does it feel like when you receive a phone call versus someone asking you to meet in person? What does it feel like? Please. Please, push back.
So when the university calls, where I have kids, like fill out whatever, I'm really happy they call me. I don't really want to meet with them. I don't have time to meet with them. I'm happy to give them whatever we give them every year. And to
respect people's time too. If it's an insignificant ask for them, if $36 is insignificant, then, you know, it's, the phone call's fine. It's not it doesn't feel disrespectful to me. For $36, I don't want to be with them.
I totally agree with you. I'm
So
not
I
disagreeing
think
with
that,
you.
that's
a different situation.
So let's go. So let's.
No, that's a
yeah.
different situation from that, because you're getting a phone call, and you got.
I didn't even get a phone
You
call.
know, with 12 choices on it.
And I think there's a differentiation. So when we're talking about engaging individually with donors, we're talking about the people who are supporting our work at a relatively significant level and have been doing so for years or have the capacity to do so for years. We're not talking about your $36. Not that they're not unimportant. We're not going to have a conversation around legacy giving tonight, but there are opportunities to engage pools of donors in different ways at different times. We're really talking about the people who support your organizations at a high level, who bring value to your work, who should be valued in return. That's what we're talking about. What messages do we communicate by how we engage with them?
Well, that was really exactly it.
So what messages did you get from that email?
I'm too busy to talk to
Right,
you.
or.
I'm too busy to talk to you.
You know, and 2 months later, I did get a phone call. Okay. And it was, I want to make sure that your name is in this role. I don't want you to miss out.
So we want to make sure that you're recognized. We want to make sure that we're using that as an excuse to close your gift because our campaign is coming to an end. I mean, those are messages that I would get from that.
Right.
Yes. So again, it's what are the messages that we're sending that we don't intend. I'm sure that the person who sent you the email didn't intend to send this
No,
message.
and I know that.
But that's
that
what you're
person
seeing.
is a very fine person.
Yes, absolutely.
But I wanted to throw that example.
Yeah, great example.
I think that it.
Great example. My big push here is that for whether you are a professional or you're a volunteer who's taken on the responsibility of raising funds for your organization, that for your significant supporters, and each organization has to determine what that means for them, that you make it an organizational priority to meet with those donors face to face. Absolutely, yes. Some people don't want to get together. Fine. Not everybody's going to want to sit down face to face and have a conversation. What organizations do over and over again, though, is they answer that question on behalf of the donor without asking. Is that we make an assumption, or because of time, we rush through a process, or because we're running an annual campaign, we have to get cards and get them closed. Our donors' lives and engagements with our organizations aren't measured in annual increments. But yet we run our fundraising campaigns in annual increments. We have to bring a relational practice to our fundraising. Otherwise, all we're doing is ensuring transactions and not relationships. All right, so let's move on to the next piece here.
Can I just ask one?
Yeah, please tell it. Go ahead.
Is there like a magic number for how often you're supposed to
A magic
meet with
number of
someone?
how often you're supposed to meet with someone?
Like, if they're a major donor to your organization?
So I think broad brush, if you can meet with your major donors in your organization 3 to 4 times a year, that's a good goal. Now, that may be an event, plus a couple of in-person meetings. That could be a small group in their home. That can take different forms, and it doesn't have to be 4 times with every single person. That's why it's important really to get to know your donors and ask them how they want to be stewarded. Ask them what's meaningful to them. That's a difficult conversation to have over the phone. And that's a difficult conversation if the basis of our relationship is
Thank you.
So let's talk about, okay, you're now getting ready to engage the donor. We're committed to face-to-face. It's a priority for the organization. We've actually set a goal of the number of donors we want to meet with this year. That one. What's a social contract? Anybody ever heard of a social contract? Pardon?
Isn't that Rousseau?
I actually don't know the origin of it, but it's not complicated. Let me give you the opposite. The opposite of a lack of social contract. How many of you have ever been to school? Raise your hand. Been to school. How many of you have ever worked for someone? Okay, great. So, how does this feel when your boss and or teacher comes up to you and goes, I want to talk to you after work, after school? Out of the blue, no context, no framing. How do you feel? You're in trouble.
Right.
You're anxious. You're nervous. Doesn't feel good. There's no agreement there. There's no discussion parameters. But yet we do that on a fairly regular basis, even when we're trying to engage with donors. I used to do it. I was a professional fundraiser for 20 years, and I would call and say, hey, let's get together. And it usually was a positive, because yeah, sure, let's get together, we'll have coffee, we'll have lunch, we'll catch up. But I knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to make an act. That was going to be on the table. Problem was, only one of us knew. The other person didn't know. And so I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but you're sitting with a donor and you've had a lovely conversation and the check comes and you go, oh, I didn't think of this. It's a really bad time to try to rush and ask is when the check comes. A social contract, very simply put, is an agreement around what you're going to discuss in the meeting. That's it. That's it. When you're engaging with your donors face to face and you're asking them to meet, establishing a social contract is critically important. It does a couple things. One, it elevates the importance of the conversation. Two, it lets the donor know what you want to discuss. There's no surprises here. You're a valued donor. I want to share with you the impact that your philanthropy has made on our organization. And I would like to speak with you about continuing your support of the good work that you've made possible for so many years. If they agree to that, then you have parameters to explore them. You have their permission to ask them for a gift in that meeting. They know and you know you're going to make that ask. There's no ambiguity, there's no anxiety, and most of the anxiety is on us. If we haven't established those parameters, we haven't said this is what we want to discuss, then you sort of have to sheepishly get it in there. You're thinking about that the entire time, instead of having a conversation about shared values and the work that you're supporting. When do we use a social contract? So right now we're talking about setting up a conversation. When else might we use a social contract? You've got an agreement, going to meet, the donor knows you're going to discuss the philanthropy. When else would you use that social contract? Yes, Tolly.
I don't know, maybe to say, I'm going to follow up with you in a month.
Great, great, absolutely.
Or like at a function that you see them at that you haven't seen them in a while and you want to say, hey, we got together. I'd like to talk about blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more specific you could be, the follow-up example is great, is reestablishing or creating a new social contract after the meeting. I like to, when I'm meeting with donors and engaging with them, restate what we've already agreed to. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Here's what I'd like to discuss as we agreed to on the phone. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss today? So you're restating the purpose for the meeting, and you're asking their permission, you're asking for their input if there's anything else that they would like to discuss. It's a great way to restate your purpose and to bring focus to the meeting. Because we have a tendency to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, which is great. Because we can explore who our donors are, but unless we lay out those parameters and restate the purpose of the meeting, sometimes we can lose our focus. Sometimes we can lose our focus.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So let's say you're with the donor.
Yes.
and
Hopefully,
donor.
yes.
At what point in the conversation do you typically do the ask?
So the question was, and you're with the donor, at what point do you do the act? Depends. You knew that was my response. It depends. It depends much on the nature of the relationship you have with that person. So if you have a history of soliciting that person or engaging them as a donor, you may have a pattern. It depends on how much you know about them, what your relationship is. For some of these conversations, the focus of it isn't necessarily going to be around the ask itself. Our social contract may be around, hey, you've been supporting the work of our organization for years. I would love to get to know you better. I would love to hear the story of why you supported our work. That could be another example of a social contract. Typically, and I don't like doing this at restaurants. I'm not a fan of meeting with donors over a meal. You lose a little bit of the intimacy that sometimes is required for these conversations. And actually, I found that when I reached out to donors and asked for a meeting to discuss their hopes, dreams, and plans, when I suggest, let's meet in your home, let's meet in your office, because I want us to be able to have an intimate conversation, there's a positive response to that. Because that's another way of elevating the importance. Saying, this conversation is so important, I don't want there to be any unnecessary distraction. I want all of our attention, I want all of my attention focused on you. So again, communicate something elevated in its importance to our donor. So in terms of the timing, not at the very end and not at the very beginning, because and there's a couple of ways to do this. You can make an ask in the room. You can sit across the table and say, will you make your gift this year? Will you do an increase? Will you fund this particular program? I also like to, for donors, send them something in advance. We've got a meeting. We know we're going to meet. We know we're going to discuss your philanthropy. Here's something that I would like you to think about in advance of our meeting that we can discuss. Maybe it's based on what you know that they care about. Maybe you know that they love Jewish overnight summer camp. They want to see kids go to Jewish summer camp. You've got a scholarship program. You're trying to raise additional dollars. Maybe that's part of it. And for some of us who are uncomfortable making the ask, by putting something out in advance that frames the conversation in an even more specific way, it gives us a different level of comfort. It's almost an advanced proposal. Here's the proposal that I'd like to discuss with you when we meet for lunch. So again, it really just depends on the nature of your relationship and your level of comfort. It also depends on what you're asking. Are you asking just for one thing? Are you asking for a single gift? Are you asking for a special gift above and beyond what they've already given? Are you asking for, in the context of a federation, are you asking for an annual campaign gift? Are you asking for a gift for a security campaign? Are you trying to start a conversation around their endowing their annual campaign gift? So part of it depends on what's on the actual agenda, but when you get to the conversation, there's not a specific do it 15 minutes into the meeting. A lot of it just depends on how well you know that donor and what past practice has been. For some of our donors who've been involved in the community for a long time, you can ask them. Our senior donors, not seniors in terms of their age, but our veteran leaders, love to be asked for their advice. How would you like to be asked? I'm new to this. I'd love to hear from you what you like to be asked and how you like to be asked and when you like to be asked. I know that you're a generous person in this community. Help me learn. That would be great. You can always use that. Giving of the advice. And then at the end, you can use that social contract to restate the next step. Because there are sometimes we have these meetings, our donors aren't quite ready to commit. So you say, may I follow up with you in 2 weeks? Or when would you like me to follow up with you on this request? What information may I share with you that will help inform your decision? Whatever that happens to be, at the very end of the meeting, restate what's happened and then state what's going to happen next. Ambiguity post-conversation is not our friend. I'll follow up with you. Great, you'll follow up with me. I have no idea when that's going to be. I have no idea what's good for you. Ask people. Ask people. When would you like me to follow up with you? What would be most helpful to you? There is a Brene Brown. Have you heard of Brene Brown? Mm-hmm. She's a researcher at Rice University. She's done research on vulnerability and all sorts of stuff. She's outstanding. She has a line that basically says, clarity is kindness. Mm-hmm. Clarity is kindness. When we're clear with our supporters about what we're asking and what we need, we are actually demonstrating a deeper level of respect for them. We're equipping them and empowering them to make decisions based on as much information as we possibly can. So be clear in your thoughts. All right, so we're in the room, we set our contract, we frame the conversation. What else do we need to do when we're in there? Meeting with our donors. What do we need to spend our time doing? Listening, but listening what? Listening like we give a damn. Listening like we give a damn. That their words have weight and value. And when we think about where we started with our own personal narrative and the questions that we answer for ourselves, use those questions. And not just a checklist of questions. Do what journalists do. Journalists ask questions, they listen, and then they look for opportunities to ask follow-up questions, layered questions. I'm curious about that. Share more about that. I'd love to hear that story. As many of these questions that we can ask our donors, it creates more touch points back to our organization. And the more that we know about them, the better informed we are in terms of creating philanthropic plans that aren't just about an annual gift or an annual membership or an annual event sponsorship. It's about bringing them on a journey that benefits our community and our organizations and ultimately gives them a better experience as a donor. Okay. Questions? Yes, please.
So I have 2 questions. One is, you talked about a generalized suggestion of 3 to 4 times a year in person for donors. I'm assuming that one of them has to at least be not asking for anything and no agenda. Maybe just get them to know that a little, or just, hi, let's spend time together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you can spend time with your donors where the social contract is, I would love to get together and catch up. I'd love to share with you a little bit about what's going on in an organization and hear how things are with you.
And then the other question I had was, so my husband and I discussed wanting to donate more to the Friends of the Idea. And he said, well, what do you actually know of the organization? And I was like, not very much. So he said, well, why don't you ask them to come to the house and we'll find out about what they do. If she were, and we did that, and if she were to ask me for money at that meeting, I would have been put off
I just wanted to know what the organization was about. And then I was so excited about what they were doing that I offered to them help and volunteer. And at some point the money will come, but that was not the appropriate time. So how do you know when the appropriate time in building that relationship is to ask for that?
So in the arc of the relationship, depends on the level of engagement. So in that context that you just shared, and then that brings up another point that I think is important to call out, is that we often forget that we're also all donors. We're all members of the community as well. We have our own experiences on which to draw. We know what has resonated with us, and we know what has created a negative image in our mind. And so you just laid out, had she made an ask when you just wanted information, even though you were excited, you didn't have an agreement around that. My practice was always to ask people, how do you make your decisions around giving? What do you look for in organizations? What do you need to see before you decide this is worthy of my investment charitable dollar? Asking those questions and letting them answer that takes the assumption game off the table, because we make assumptions all the time about individuals about whom we know very little in terms of how they view their philanthropy and what their process is and what they need to see to make decisions. And the more information we have about that, the better equipped we are to be able to provide that. What we're trying to do is mirror what our donors are telling us. Oh, you need this? Here's what we're going to give you. Ask them. Ask people. If people are philanthropic, they will gladly tell you how they make those decisions. We don't have to shy away from that. You're not asking them for money. You're just asking them about their process, about what they look for, about what they value. Ask them. Other questions? Yes, please, Jack.
Is there a generalization to be made about how donors hear appeals from professional staff versus volunteers for that organization?
So in general, in the field of philanthropy is becoming more and more professionalized. More and more donors are wanting to engage directly with professionals rather than with volunteer solicitors. That's across the board. The one primary exception to that seems to be major capital campaigns at the highest level, where the peer-to-peer fundraising is still very effective. And it's the join me in building this thing. Now, many donors to causes we care about the most happen to be builders themselves, so they resonate with those messages. But more and more the field of philanthropy is changing, so the professionals are driving a lot of the activity. So it's forcing organizations to re-examine how they engage lay leadership, how they train lay leadership as advocates, and what is the highest and best use of our lay partners. Most of our lay leaders, the primary currency in which they trade is access. I, as a professional, don't have the same relationships as my volunteers, as our lay leadership. I can't pick up the phone and get a meeting with this person. But there are 5 people around the table who are volunteer leaders who absolutely can do that. They can use their social capital to introduce organizations to their peers, their colleagues, and their social networks.
In that case, you go with 2 people.
Depends. I'd love to. If I have a lay leader who has a relationship and they're willing to open the door, I absolutely want them to be there. I want them to talk about, like we did at the very beginning tonight, why they care about their organization, what they've seen, what motivates them, share their passion. Because then that peer sitting across the table gives them additional credibility for why they're sitting in the room. After that, more often than not, it becomes a one-on-one engagement between the professional and the lay leader. But that initial meeting, by all means, for most of our lay leadership who are active in community, again, we saw at the very beginning when we asked how many of you like to fundraise, very few people love the thought of fundraising. So it's an easy ask for board members and committee members to help open doors. If you believe this work is important, you care about the thrival of our organization, our ability to continue to thrive, not just survive, please help us by opening doors. Please.
I was wondering, Dennis, if what you were asking was, should the executive director be the person, or if you have a development person? And the problem with development people is that, like.
There's a lot of problems with development.
The procurement phase, so like, I was like 2 or 3 years at something last in the organization, so that person established the relationship, and there's this revolving door of development directors. So is it the executive director? Were you asking that?
Yes, well, again, so I'm just thinking, you know, it just, so my question was, is there a generalization to be made about how donors hear requests from, say, me as an executive director? Does that come across as more self-serving versus somebody on my board who's giving to my organization, giving their time, their treasure, their talent, and speaking on behalf for the people. I have details in my head that my volunteers don't have. You know, I have institutional memory and all kinds of answer questions related to the program. The volunteers can bring, hey, this is what I'm doing with my time and my talent, my treasure. Please want you to consider joining.
If you can orchestrate a partnership so it works like that, where you've got your lay leader representing the story of the organization, and the peer, and the professional as the subject matter expert, talking about all the things that we couldn't possibly equip our lay leaders to do. They're not living in it on a daily basis. That's a great partnership. That's a great model. It goes back to having an understanding of our donors. Some of our donors want to deal directly with the executive director of the organization. They want to hear from the CEO. They do not feel comfortable discussing their philanthropy with a peer. Some only want to hear from a peer. They only want to hear from the leader. They won't discuss it with them. So again, it goes back to asking our donors, what works for them? What makes them comfortable? How do they want these relationships? Part of the challenge is that because philanthropy is shifting, because generations in terms of their engagement in community is shifting, fewer and fewer people, even if they're participating in the community as a volunteer, fewer and fewer people are willing to do the work of previous generations in terms of taking an active role in fundraising. So whether professionals are equipped to do it or not becomes a reality that professionals are carrying more and more of this weight because we have fewer lay leaders who are doing the work. But if you've got the partnership there and you can leverage it, it still works very effectively. Yes.
So how do you balance bandwidth with the idea that the professionals are doing more of the apps? So, you know, if I have, 50 cards or whatever, can I meet with all 50 of those people? Well, if I can't, then maybe I need more staff. But then that's a problem.
No, it's so the question was around capacity and bandwidth. Our organizations, I would submit, and I'm talking about Jewish communal institutions primarily, have not done a great job of assessing and evaluating our own capacity fairly. Is that we place too much responsibility on individual professionals, and oftentimes there's a lack of prioritization. So everything becomes an A+ priority. So how do you differentiate and make decisions on where you're focusing your time, energy, and attention? If you think about it in terms of events, many of our organizations run events, comfortable with events. Event production is something that we've specialized in for thousands of years. We just do it. Rarely do we take the time to evaluate the success of that. Rarely do we take the time to calculate the number of human hours that are dedicated to certain events. And if we took those same human hours and apply them to direct donor engagement, training of our lay leadership, stewarding our donors, what would that look like? So it's not always just about adding professionals. Sometimes it's evaluating our workflow, our activities, and our priorities. And I will submit that most of our organizations do not operate at capacity. We do need to add more resources to our organizations to function effectively. If we look at the market and we look at our competition, hospitals, universities, arts organizations, etc., they have increased resources in their development apparatus. They have added professional capacity. They've invested in their organizational capacity to steward donors. And it has resulted in the majority of transformative gifts going outside our community. Yes, please.
Not a question, a comment. Quick 2 hours. It's hard to believe it was 2 hours. But I don't think I'm probably not the only one who thinks this. I thought your most impactful comment or question was, how many have had, or think for 30 seconds of your most important conversation you've had? No, session, conversation. And then you came back and said, how many people did it go? That was very impactful.
That if you take away nothing else, if you take away nothing else from our time together tonight, is that is the one thing. That's the one thing. So Yashka, great job picking up on it. But in all seriousness, that's the game changer for our organization and our work. In order to do this work effectively, it has to be face to face. It has to be a relationship. So, I'll stick around afterwards. Thank you very much for your energy.
So that was a perfect answer to actually some of the things that I am. Thank you very, very much. And I just want to say to everybody who came to this tonight that you are all very brave. And I appreciate the fact that you wanted to come here and learn about fundraising, okay? Because it's not popular. It's what most people are afraid to do. But you took your Thursday evening, and we may have been a small group tonight, but we are truly a mighty, mighty group. And I am so appreciative that you chose to join us this evening. So I just wanted to say a little bit something about Howard. So we titled this Inspire, Lend Your Voice to the Community. It is what Howard did every waking moment of his day. He inspired all those around him, and he showed us how to lend our voices to the community. Tonight you heard from Dirk to help us do just that. There are several things that I took away from this evening, not just from Dirk, but from all of you. So you can just allow me a few moments. So some of the things that really stood out for me was trust, values, humanizing, stories, clarity, and kindness. I never thought to put those two words together, but they really resonated for me and really spoke to me. Relational practice, and then of course listening. So I just want to say thank you. I think that we all are walking away with the knowledge that you too can inspire and be the voice. So thank you. And oh wait, I'm supposed to say something. So there are what are those forms called?
Evaluations.
If you could take a moment to fill out, and I'm also supposed to I want to thank Heather and Jody for really doing the work because they make it happen. This program would not have come together without the support of so many people. Many thanks to the staff, Heather Fiedler, Jody Engel, and Dirk Housen. This program was brought to you by the Jewish Federation of Greater Hartford and the Jewish Leadership Academy, JLA. Funding is generously provided by Federation, the Jewish Community Foundation, the Auerbach Shire Foundation, the Samuel Roskin Trust at Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, Leah and Richard Rubenstein, Lisa and Peter Fishman, Ellen and Michelle Parker, and Sandy and Arnie Michelski. So thank you. I hope you'll come back because I think we need a part two. I think we need to continue this conversation and we should never stop having it. Thank you.
We'll also have at your places a flyer for our next community forum. Please come. Casper Turquile, he's going to be speaking at the Mark Twain Museum, and You shouldn't miss it. It's going to be a great conversation. It's in the auditorium. Yeah.
Yep.
And he's.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, that echoey.
Is it
It's very echoey. That's, no, and so there's going to be the pre-discussion out there, but then the talk is in the auditorium that's much, much better.
Yes, Harry Potter podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
I'm sure
Jill
Jill.
and me,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah.
So it's my husband's birthday.